It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast. You got your co-hosts here, Blake Murphy and Marcos Labrada. You can follow us there on x.com. We're also live on YouTube if you want to tune in, and we've got some great content for your show today, guys. We're going to start with a bit of news that popped up over the week, Marcos, which was we had seen some tweets, we had heard a little bit of rumors, but Patrick Peterson ended up signing a one-year deal with the Arizona Cardinals to be able to retire with the team. And what's really interesting, at least, is that there's been some mixed responses to this, which I think is very much something that matches kind of how Patrick Peterson's time in Arizona started, how the greatness was seen, and then also how we've been able to see, at least as far as for maybe there was some, maybe not controversy, at least for how it ended. Ultimately, it seems like the Ring of Honor is going to be in his future. And Marcos, I think the first thing that I thought as a Cardinals fan was that this makes a lot of sense for Arizona. But we'll talk about it because some fans are probably not that happy about it, at least for the most part. We'll also talk some NFL draft, go through a complete first-round mock draft, every team in the first round, kind of alternating picks back and forth. But before we hop into everything else, how are you doing this week? And I got to say, how's your new setup been going, man?
Well, it's been going good. I'm just glad to actually have it down and everything, because last week I was in a room and it was kind of empty and you could hear the echoes and stuff. So today's a lot better. Got my earphones in, got my microphone working. So we got no issues when it comes to sound, when it comes to having the setup not echo and whatnot. But it's been really hot. So today has been like the start of the 100 degrees this week. So I'm always close to the weather because I'm always outside, and it's just unbearable right now.
Yeah, no, it is one of those places where you know that it starts getting hot. Once it hits April, it's going to be hot probably till Halloween. That's why the Arizona Cardinals fortunately play indoors. So let's go ahead here, and we're going to do a quick check-in, at least with just kind of the reaction or the response that everyone had at the time, because Patrick Peterson is an 8-time Pro Bowler for Arizona. He ended up basically being kind of was their face of the franchise for probably, I would say, a brief moment in time when it seemed like Larry Fitzgerald was going to retire. It seemed like Josh Rosen was the quarterback of the future. They may be bringing in a Joey Bosa. And we quickly saw Larry Fitzgerald stayed around for a couple more years. I think he at least stayed around through the 2020 season. Kyler Murray came in and took on essentially the Arizona Cardinals quarterback spots. And what we've really been able to see is that Patrick Peterson left Arizona on some interesting terms, going to the Minnesota Vikings for several years, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers for another year. And ultimately, he is a 3-time All-Pro selection, went to the Pro Bowl 8 times overall, was a top 5 pick in a 2011 draft that included Cam Newton, Von Miller, J.J. Watt, A.J. Green, I believe, went one pick after him. Also had Blaine Gabbert, which we're not going to, talk as much about Blaine Gabbert at least, but that ultimately is kind of the legacy of being a great player for a great draft, great Cardinal while he's on the field. But a lot of, I think, with Patrick Peterson that can't be ignored, Marcos, is just the way that his time in Arizona ended. Some of the things he's said after the season, at least, or I should say after the 2019 season, there was a little bit of an ugly breakup that happened, at least with him. Now, what is interesting and kind of cool is I do think this brings a little bit of room for healing back and forth. It takes two to tango. So clearly the Cardinals didn't have issues with Peterson. And Peterson was willing to go back, at least sign that 1-year deal with the Cardinals. It's strange that Calais Campbell is going to actively be on the Cardinals roster next year, while Patrick Peterson is not, considering that there's a couple of years in between. But when you first saw this was happening, did you think positively? Was it mixed, or was it more negative thinking about how Peterson left the team?
Well, I always connected that to like what happened with him and Keim, because he did attribute a lot of that to like Steve Keim and the way he like lied to him. He's essentially said that he wanted to stay here as an Arizona Cardinal, and I'll be one of the guys that will say I didn't think that we should have retained him, mostly because not because I didn't like him, but because like his health and not his health, mostly his physicality just wasn't there like it used to be in a Vance Joseph type of defense. I didn't think he could thrive in being like off ball, like he 7 yards off the ball in zone coverage and whatnot. He ended up proving me wrong when he went to Minnesota in the second year. He had like a spectacular season with the Vikings and stuff, showed that he still had something. But with the Cardinals in his last season, I was like, nah, they probably shouldn't retain him. We need to move on. We need to go ahead and draft the next guy up and everything. But I've always liked Patrick Peterson. And one of the things I didn't like was that he didn't take accountability for his PED thing. That's the thing that rubbed me the wrong way. When he got suspended, instead of just taking accountability for that, he was mostly like insulted about the fact that they weren't going to pay him a certain bonus or a certain the money that was owed to him because of the fact that he was going to miss those games. That's on him. That's not on nobody else but Patrick Peterson. But like he's pretty much the reason why I start, looking at the draft as close as I did. 2011, I knew the Cardinals were going to select Patrick Peterson, 5th overall. I know that we already had we had a Dominic Rogers Cromartie as one of our starting corners, but I thought to myself, like, there's no shame in doubling up on best player available, especially with someone like Peterson, because then it makes DRC disposable. But it does really give you like a good 1 and 2 cornerback duo. We didn't see that, but just the body, the athleticism, how he did in the broad jump, how he did it in the 40-yard dash, the fact that everybody was talking about how what a physical stud he was at being able to return kicks as well and be that physical and whatnot. It's just I loved watching him get drafted, and then I followed his career year by year, studied defense, and I could say that him, Calais Campbell, Darrell Washington, Darnell Dockett, and Adrian Wilson are the reason why I like the defense and defensive scheme over offense. So I can say that I'm proud of him coming back, proud that he's going to be in the Ring of Honor. I don't think there should be any doubt. And it's funny seeing these top 2 comments saying no one wants him to retire Cardinal. Bro thinks he's special. Yeah, he's way wrong on that. And Sherman was a different type of cornerback. Patrick Peterson went longer and had a longer career and whatnot, and Sherman just fell off a cliff. So I don't know if I could say he's better.
Yeah, it's something at least that when we're talking about undisputed, he is one of the undisputed greats of the 2010 decades for the Arizona Cardinals. We got to see them make the playoffs several times in that span. One of the things I think that kind of sums up a lot of that too would be when you're looking back at the 2020 season. So remember the 2019 season, you talked about the PED suspension, at least that Patrick Peterson had. There was talk that, he wanted the Cardinals to try to kind of give him a pay raise to offset some of the contract that happened. Cardinals didn't seem like they were willing to do that. But it still talks about some of the play that we got to see later in his career. You got a 3rd and 5 with Russell Wilson and a bailing out throwing the ball here. He overthrows DK Metcalf, and you can see Peterson kind of picks that ball off. Just the natural ball hawk skills that he had, being able to get those interceptions, was something that I think Cardinals fans are going to remember, along with I believe it was against the Rams game as a rookie when Patrick Peterson was overtime and he was able to return that one punt for, I think it was 99 yards, was able to basically walk off the game for the Arizona Cardinals. It was just one of those when you're a rookie, you're trying to make your way around in the league, you want to see some of these different highlights, and you want to also have some different moments. Those moments are going to be ones that are going to stick out for Cardinals fans for probably the vast, vast majority of when people bring up Patrick Peterson. They're going to bring back a reel like this. Just looking at how, he goes back to get the ball, catches it at the 1, and we got to see a lot of his 4.3 speed at his 216, 220 pound size. A lot of people thought he was too big to play corner and would have to move to being a safety. And he was able to show with that explosive talent that he was pretty much good to go, at least from that level. It's one of those spots of where it's one of the most successful draft picks the Cardinals have ever had and have ever made.
Yeah, exactly. And it was one that he made a pick in the first, like it was one of the first round, like knock it out of the park. And obviously, you saw that punt return. You saw some of the greats right there. You did see a little bit of Daryl Washington there. He's another Cardinal that I really liked on defense. But that core of like defenders was like pretty much that defense that was carried over from Wiz Hunt that went over into the Bruce Arians years. So that's one thing that Bruce Arians really did have when he came over as their head coach. They had stability at defense and they built upon that. And let's not forget, Patrick Peterson is the reason why Tyrann Mathieu became a Cardinal, because he advocated for him. They went to the same school, they were friends, they still are friends to this day. And he really did advocate, like, hey, that whole situation with his marijuana stint or whatever. I'll make sure that if you draft this guy, we will like put him on the right path. And I mean, it ended up paying off for us. We had a safety that was like an all pro caliber safety that went on to have himself a great career. And another person that left on bad terms as well. So we know that like it's more time that like just doesn't really end things well with the organization with players. So I don't blame Patrick Peterson. I know that a lot of people are soured on him, but I think the response that we get from most of these people is that he does deserve to come back and retire as a Cardinal. And like it's awesome to see somebody come back for that, aside from Calais.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I remember too in that 2020 season, unless I'm mistaken, was just the way that 2020 game ended. I think it was either week 7 or the following week. We were able to see the Cardinals kind of had that crazy comeback with the 2 missed field goals and everything. Well, one of the things that I also remember about that game was that there was a play that was made with Russell Wilson to DK Metcalf that, and may have been the second game of the season, unless I'm mistaken, where Peterson just got kind of burned right away from the line of scrimmage. And it was a spot where you realized that his days of being a man cover corner were just not going to be there anymore. It was a place where guys who play have a time limit that they have in the NFL, and Peterson was able to move in 2020 as a free agent to the Vikings on a 1-year deal. He stayed there actually, I think, for a couple of years. And then after the 2023 season, he was actually out of the NFL in 2024. So he had his own podcast, everything there. So the fact that he's able to come back is, I think, also a good sign, because you're talking about when you're a franchise that gets some of those lower ratings or has a reputation like the Cardinals, being able to stack different building blocks of successful draft picks and of guys who are coming back to the franchise with good memories is something that can be helpful. Kurt Warner is probably the first one of those kind of guys who went, hey, I still have a falling out with the Rams. I'm viewing myself retiring as a Cardinal. It kind of was able to give a little bit of gravitas that's led this Cardinals team out of, the, I could say, basement dwellers into a place where we've seen there kind of been more of that team back on the rise again as things ebb and flow. But yeah, anything else as far as last thoughts or any other memories? I think that one of the spots that, like you mentioned with Peterson, with the tackling, with some of the play in some big games, a lot of people remember that he had, I think it was one play in the Panthers game that the Cardinals had with the overtime. And then the previous week, there was the Hail Mary attempt, which I felt like was more of a coaching thing. The Cardinals decided that they were going to bring a blitz at Aaron Rodgers for the Hail Mary. Didn't leave guys back there in coverage, and as a result, you had Jeff Janis get back there twice with Justin Bethel having to kind of play over the top with Peterson there. And, it was one of those places where the team ended up getting the win at the end of the day. But a lot of people are going to remember guys for negative reasons. A lot of times it's not going to be for positive reasons. This is something I think that is positive for the Cards to be able to bring him back in to the franchise. Got a couple people here in the comments. Silver Wolf saying, let's go. Good to have you here. And then Dana R saying, hi. Hello, Dana. Good to see you. Let's shift our focus a little bit now from Patrick Peterson. We're going to talk a little bit about just the controversy from fans, like you said. Do you think that this is a case of, with Patrick Peterson retiring as a Card, we can all say, great, this is a good thing, this is helpful, this is something that we probably would have expected from a successful pick who's made that many Pro Bowls, made 3 All-Pros. The question I think some fans have had is, does his PED suspension, does the way that he left the team, how much of that ends up being something that should affect him being a part of the Ring of Honor? Like, is he a Ring of Honor guy or not? Curious kind of to hear your thoughts right away.
Well, I know that he is very he takes care of his diet very well, and this goes back to 2014. So if you guys remember, 2014 was like kind of a down season. I remember asking myself that question every game, telling myself like, "What's going on with Peterson? He's just a little tick too slow." And there's pictures of him in 2014 where he will say himself he was a little bit overweight, not really overweight, but that's what he says. So what happened was he came down with the diagnosis of I forgot what it's
Type 2 diabetes,
type 2
actually. Yeah.
diabetes. There you go. So
His
type
wife
2
is a nurse,
diabetes.
so
So like there was a story about Bruce Arians thinking he was partying when he would come to practice. He said, Peterson, you got to stop. You got to knock it off with the partying and stuff. Are you really showing up like that? And he's telling Bruce Arians like, I'm not partying, man. Something's really going on. So he got the diagnosis. Since then, he's slimmed. He's gotten his diet on the right path. So aside from having his wife be like, be in the medical, industry and whatnot, like he knows how to, get his diet together and make sure he eats the right stuff. So I think what happened was he was going through recovery after the 2018 season. He either slipped it up and thought he could fasten the recovery of what kind of injury he was trying to nurse during the offseason. And then, of course, they got caught. So if it was something that was a yearly thing, he would have gone caught sooner, and that would have been the case. But there's two types of Petersons since we've drafted two different body types. And Tyrann Mathieu even said something about this. It's written somewhere in the internet where he missed the Patrick Peterson out of the draft, but the Patrick Peterson after 2014 was a slim, very, very like slender body figure. And you can also see that in his body type. It made him a better press corner, but it took away the physicality. It took away him being that stud like punt returner. Because if you look at him, his size when he was drafted, he was about closer to 220, but he was muscle. He was just a pure athlete. People are saying he's like a safety in a corner's body. Then 2014 happened. Then after that, when he got his diet right, you could see it in his arms. He's just like slender, like kind of like a Sherman body where he's like skinny. So if somebody's taking PEDs, why would he be so slim? Like that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't tarnish anything, and it would be a repeat offense if that were even the case. No, you're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry, we had someone at least who was working on the microwave in the background. Figured you didn't want to hear some of the chicken tenders getting made. So, yeah, it's an interesting case at least where you talk about does that actually impact or affect a player? And I think, like you said, it's a little different for the NFL than it has been for Major League Baseball. That's been a huge thing, I think, at least that has been tough. I think at the end of the day, you kind of be able to recognize that every single legacy is going to have some complications because every legacy is going to end. Peterson didn't even play in his final season that he was eligible, and now he's signing that one-day contract. Wasn't able to play in 2024. It's one of those places of where Father Time does come for everyone, and it's going to be something that I'm very curious to see, at least over time, how it plays out as far as not just maybe with team relations or other stuff. Does he like kind of move into a national perspective? And what does it look like as far as with the Cardinals and their relationships with players in the future? Because one of the things that we can say, Marcos, is that for all this franchise and this team has done, they've always been able to do a good job of taking care of their star players. So let's go ahead and we can.
21 is going to be retired. My bad. I wonder if 21
is
going to be retired.
Good. That is an interesting question, at least. I feel like when it comes to number of retirements, we've had a couple in the past that maybe seem like they weren't quite there, but that's a good question to wonder about. I feel like it's going to be more like the Larry Fitzgerald ones that are there. I don't know if they'll do a Calais Campbell retirement for numbers, but like, one of the best examples you can say of is if Kyler plays for 3 more years, would you retire his number? Like, there's a great question to be able to have. I think a lot of that's going to come with, at least with the Cardinals, and what kind of was the defining era of Patrick Peterson was they were a winning franchise from 2013 to 2017 under Bruce Arians. That was the most 50 wins that the team had during that time frame. But they still didn't actually win a title. And I think that's one of the areas that we've seen with the Cardinals, they can have star players, they do well, they get guys into the Ring of Honor, but being able to go out and compete consistently or build a team enough to be able to actually get to a Super Bowl, win a title, we've only really seen it once with this organization in that 2008 Super Bowl before Peterson actually came around. Let's go now and talk a little bit, at least with just with Kyler Murray. He's got a softball game that's coming up at least on the 17th for charity, which is, I always find it funny when you talk about NFL players doing charity softball. Most of those NFL players are not going to also be like a top 10 draft pick in baseball as well. So Kyler is probably going to be the best football player there on the field. There's a couple of other stars coming in, some guys who are, not necessarily in the NFL, like Josh Okogie, Larry Fitzgerald's going to be there. We also know that there's a couple of guys from other teams, like a George Pickens on the Steelers. I've seen some Cardinals fans and wondered, like, hey, they just traded for DK Metcalf. Pickens is wanting another deal. Cardinals, there could be a need at wide receiver too for a deep threat. I've seen some people trying to kind of draw that line. I think what we're really wanting to look at, though, is there's an interview he did with PHNX, which is with Bo Brock and Johnny Venerable, who do a great job of covering stuff. Johnny, obviously, for those who followed for like a long time, was like the first kind of co-host of the podcast before we rebooted everything, at least for the most part. But there is a lot, I think, at least, that we were able to see with Kyler Murray in terms of a little bit more of that personality, a little bit more of just kind of how he felt laid back in terms of the interview. And there were some interesting comments that he made about his upcoming season, being bullish on Marvin Harrison Jr., his running ability, and a few other topics as well. What did you think, at least overall, when you saw the interview, Marcos? Because I think it was one of the better interviews that we've been able to at least see of Murray's thus far. It's been a long way since that long time ago Dan Patrick interview. That's all I'll say for sure.
Yeah, that is true. If you put that into perspective about like how he was as a rookie to how he is now, he's a lot more laid back, a lot more comfortable in taking interviews. There were some things that I wish that were asked. I'm not going to go too much into that. And there were some things that I didn't really like that he said. But other than that, like showing that he's a human being, I'm on board with that. Like there were some people, like I think it was the flagship station 98.7 that was talking about like, hey, like, or I think no, actually it wasn't that. It was a Southwest Bias with I forgot what his name is.
Espo, Greg Esposito, yeah.
Espo, there you go, Espo, who said that, like he liked the fact that it felt like you were talking to a human. It's like, yeah, that's true. I do like the fact that the questions, the things that were being talked about, him laughing and him doing that. But there were some things that did stick out to me that I did like that he said. So he asked a question to the guest, not to the guest, to the host. He said, "What do you think about this?" Like he answered the question to whatever he was being asked, and then he turned it over. It's like, I don't know. How do you guys feel about that? He wanted to hear some feedback. That's good. If he wants to hear feedback, that's him. Not so much like just answering the question and putting a stamp on that. It's him saying like, well, "What do you guys feel about that?" Question was asked was about the running, him running the ball. Like he says, "Oh, there's a stat that says that I run less in the second half and this and that." And he said, "What do you guys feel about that?" And of course, they gave their 2 cents on that, and they were trying to more so say it's about the scheme, like that's the scheme fit and whatnot, and it's not more so about him. But one thing that I will say is I am going to hold him on that comment because after he made that comment, they said he wants to run the ball more often. There's nuance to that people need to take into account. One, do you want him to run more because that could present himself to more injury? Two, what kind of running do you want to do? I mentioned, they don't run bash with this offense. They run more of a pistol, like read option where he's in the pistol handing off the ball or he's in the shotgun. They're not doing the whole like motion and handing off the ball.
They'll do stuff under center as well too, and then they'll use that for bootlegs. Yeah. But like you said, it's going to be a little bit different as far as the way that they're using him and running. And then the scrambling is the other portion, at least, that we've been able to see as well.
Most of the yards, yeah. That's where it comes from, scrambling stuff. He did also mention about so I didn't like it, but I liked what he said. It's kind of like a half and half. Like, I'll take what I can from Kyler Murray because I am very critical of him, but any positive I will take. What he did say, like, he needed to hit more of those off-platform plays. So it can't just be an off-platform offense because that's not how you're going to succeed or whatnot. But he did say that, like, he didn't hit a lot of those, or him and his team didn't hit enough of those. He said that the 3-step, 5-step drop, that's not something he's worried about. I'm like, I that's the fundamentals right there. But other than that, he did say, hey, those off platform throws, the ones that make the game, the big plays, that they need to hit more of those. That tells me that he wants to be more like perfect when it comes to like his entire offense. So he's willing to get better with that. He also talked very positive about Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't know why people would think that the Cardinals would regret drafting him. I think that's something that Kyler Murray wanted. Kyler Murray wanted himself like a good, big physical wide receiver. Now he has two, and so that would definitely benefit him. And I like the fact that he came to bat for him. So thank you for doing that Kyler Murray.
Yeah, something that Murray at least had talked about too was just the ability to say that. I think the quote at least was on Cardinals Corner, was the one interview he had with getting ready for the charity softball game. He talked about Marvin 8 touchdowns, didn't feel like he scratched the surface, had a lot of confidence in him, knew that. He also said that Marvin didn't have the season he wanted to have. You and I have talked a little bit about how it's a pick that we feel like at least is going to be just a solid Ohio State receiver pick at worst. The hope a lot of people had would be developing into that 1,200 yards a year superstar level, which we'll have to be able to see how that works out for this next season. One of the things, obviously, we've said is with the scheme and how it works is it's a run-first scheme. The receivers are kind of put into a spot where we saw as it started the season, Marv was kind of running routes to clear things up for guys underneath. There was times he moved into the slot later in the season. And then Michael Wilson then with Zay Jones kind of were the two guys who spent some time at least on the outside with Marv in the slot. And then they did kind of shift to Zay Jones is another outside receiver. Marv is on this side and getting a little bit more of Michael Wilson off of the slot before Wilson got injured to end the season. So these are all cases where I think, like what you said, is when we talk about what a player's reputation is, a lot of times it can be tied to their on-field presence, their on-field performance. And it's a big year for Murray. He has to be able to take that step forward if he's going to end up moving into the out of the top 12 to 13 into the top 7, top 8, maybe a higher type of quarterbacks that are making that leap like a Jalen Hurts has made over the last few years. It's going to take some of the people around him stepping up. It is going to take him stepping up. Now, one of the things that he has also said is that he believes that he should be running more. He says he's open for running more next year. It's such a weapon. It's kind of funny, at least, that these comments came, Marcos, a week after someone had said, hey, Kyler just isn't running enough. He doesn't like to run. And so we had said, does he run enough? The answer was, well, probably 1 to 2 more times a game max. You're talking then about an additional 17 to 18 carries. That would put him up into 100 rushing carries per year. It would also probably at about 7.1 yards per carry, dropping to maybe 6.5. But you're then talking about a good 600-yard season on the ground, being able to have that ground-breaking speed, and then being able to hopefully open up some things in the run game or with that scrambling ability, get that big play down the field. Something that I think is an interesting question, could he have a career high in rushing yards in 2025? He says he feels like he's fully recovered from the ACL. I think this is one of those cases, Marcos, where the people and how they feel about Kyler Murray entering 2026 is going to really reflect on, does he stay accountable to what he's saying here for 2025? And could we see the playbook make some alterations, especially adding a few more designed runs to get those rushing numbers up?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. We will see if that's exactly what it matches to. And if it does match to it, I do want to say that I do want him to be at least more careful and keep his health like there. But there was some certain instances where there were some games where he wasn't even getting any type of design runs at all. He would get like 1 or 2 and that's it. And like at that point, it's just like, nah, they're not even trying to put that in the scheme. But the one thing that he also gets his rushing yards from is from those scrambles. So he runs, but he also needs to have more designed runs and whatnot. Doesn't have to be a crazy good amount, but it's enough to keep the defense true, quote unquote, because then that opens up like other, avenues for like receivers when they do want to, like, when he does want to pull the ball and then, find his receiver with those RPOs and stuff.
Yep. No, I think that's going to be something that we'll want to see with Murray. It was an overall good interview for the most part, at least with that one there. I am very excited to be able to see at least what does a fully healthy feeling Kyler Murray look like? What is a Kyler Murray that has a backup in Jacoby Brissett, who we know is athletic enough to be able to actually have some of a coverage for 1 or 2 games to give Murray the confidence, hey, we can go out there and win a game. We don't have to worry about having a Clayton Tune or, Desmond Ridder being kind of like, he's the guy until he wasn't type of a performance. Let's do a little bit with going over with the NFL draft. So we're sitting exactly 2 weeks out from this point in time at 6:21 p.m. With the time the draft starts, we will be in maybe I want to say within a 30-minute window, depending on commercials, of finding out the newest member of your Arizona Cardinals. And as we are getting closer, it always follows a similar pattern, Marcos. You get some truth out from the combine. You get a lot of smoke, a lot of mirrors, a lot of visits that are going to happen back and forth. And then you end up with a lot of actual truth and coming out 48 hours or so before the draft. Like I remember the one year in 2018, it was like, all right, you talk about like predictions that people are making. This guy over here's got the Cardinals trading up from pick 15 to pick 10 for Josh Rosen. Wow, I wonder what actually happened. It ended up being that was the exact move, exact trade that the Cardinals were looking to do on that day. What we're at least still seeing with the Cardinals here, at least, is we got a little bit more insight on the reported top 30 visits. We don't have as much as far as rumors, but we do have a little bit of insight that's coming up, at least from both the Walter Football site, but also from, I think it's Tony Pauline and Sportskeeda. He's talked about that the Cardinals are expected to at least look at the trenches, potentially a cornerback in the first round, and an offensive line, the right tackle position, something else that they're interested in. It doesn't seem like they're looking at a linebacker or an offensive guard in the first round to what we know right now, and clearly that could change. But wanted to at least go and just update you guys at least on this list for some of the names that we have not talked about that the Cardinals have had in for their top 30 visits. The new players that would be in there would be the likes of Trey Amos, the defensive back from Ole Miss. He's a cover corner that actually plays very well in man coverage, but it's like you're talking about a man guy who thrives in cover corner. She's maybe the closest to that outside one-on-one shutdown corner model we've seen in this year's draft, as the cornerback out of Michigan, I believe it's Will Johnson, is the DB. He is more of his own guy, which is very interesting because you look at how the Cardinals will rotate and mix up some of their quarters coverage of their zone, and then some guys they'll play man. We got to see that the Cardinals met with the likes of TJ Sanders, a defensive tackle who probably goes round 2. We have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, a running back out of Arizona, probably counts as local visit. Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's a wide receiver, and one of those guys that may actually be one of their potential targets that I could see them having on day 3 of the NFL draft. And then you end up wrapping that up at least with Ty Robinson, Nebraska, and Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. That being the news broken on PHNX Cardinals by Mike Garafolo. All right. We got a couple of new names here, at least for that one. I don't know if we have to go over the defensive tackles with Sanders. I think we could talk a little bit about Jihad Campbell and Kenneth Grant, I think will be the 2 guys that we can look at. And then I would not be surprised if the Cardinals did actually go in and invest a draft pick late on the likes of Keandre Lambert-Smith. He's a guy who ran a 4.3 40. They have got guys later in the roster, but if you're wanting to talk about a speed burner who can get open out of the slot, that may be one of those guys you could find on day 3, maybe at the latest early day 3. If you got that 4.3 speed, a lot of times guys will look at you. That's one of the areas that I think the question a lot of Cardinals fans have had is, do you need to take a receiver in the first round to be able to kind of get that guy opposite Marv? You take one of those guys maybe on day 2. Can you wait till later in the draft? Or do you just flood the position with guys at the line and on the defensive side? I think that having Jihad Campbell and Kenneth Grant in, along with some of these DTs like Ty Robinson and TJ Sanders, shows that we really have the Cardinals focusing on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, and obviously since we had a Monty Austinfort, he's been focusing on like the offense when it comes to like our first round picks and whatnot. Obviously, we traded back from a pick that we could have had and took offense after that. So they are definitely going to try to level it off by trying to get some young athletes on the defensive side. So Jihad Campbell is the guy that's like kind of controversial, mostly because of the fact that he's labeled and dubbed as an off-ball linebacker. And we've had our instances as Cardinals fans where people are just kind of like, no, don't do that. Don't do it again. Don't do it again. This is the first round and whatnot. but he's not really projected to me as an off-ball linebacker. He's projected to be more like a transitional going to like a Sam linebacker, so somebody that you can drop into coverage, but you want him to stay on the line of scrimmage because he has the size. He's somewhat like we mentioned this before. We even got on air like a Hassan Reddick type of pass rusher and stuff. Has the build, has the ability. People are projecting him to be more useful on the line of scrimmage going forward, more so than just going back. But it doesn't mean that he can't drop into coverage. Kenneth Grant is a guy that I like. I've been mostly following him because of the Bootleg Football podcast. They had the interview with him. It was excellent. He's very smart. One of the things that's kind of underrated about these defensive tackles, it's just how smart they are when it comes to making their reads on the offensive line, because there's a lot of things that you can pick up tendencies wise on offensive linemen that could give you the edge and knowing exactly what kind of play they're going to run or what they're going to do. So I was really impressed with Kenneth Grant's, just his interview and whatnot. But I will say, I mean, Jihad Campbell, if he gets picked, I wonder if people are just going to riot. People are just going to be like, you know what is wrong with you? Like, I thought we learned our lessons from before. I wonder what's going to happen if that's definitely the pick.
Yeah, that's something that's really interesting, at least as far as with that. The one thing that I remember, at least, that we can say about with Campbell is that the Cardinals have not really drafted guys who are there before the day 3 of the NFL draft. So they would be going against their type. I will say this, if you are going to go against your type and take a linebacker in the first round, and there is probably a need, like he would get starting reps as an off-ball linebacker, that would be one of the guys athletically that you could do with it, because he's kind of like a built-a player for the most part, where he's got a great motor, he's got huge size, he's one of the players at least that is character-wise off the charts. One of the things at least that has me thinking that he may not be a Cardinal, though, is the fact that he has not been able to really do anything as far as with most of the testing, because he's got a shoulder issue that's going on, and people have wondered about those medical rechecks in Indianapolis. That's something at least that we'll be able to see. What we've been able to at least find that's been interesting is his stock has kind of slidden a little bit for the most part, but he is just a big, fast linebacker prospect, at least, that has a lot of the traits that are there. The biggest thing that he doesn't quite have that's been interesting is he doesn't quite have that same level of linebacker instincts, which I think is part of why the Cardinals, why I think they go for guys on day 3. They'll find guys who may be a little bit smaller, are instinctual, but they can scheme their linebackers in with Rick Rallis and Jonathan Gannon's defense. And then the focus is on cornerback and defensive line. When you talk about, like, he ran the 40-yard dash, didn't do any bench pressing because of his shoulder injury, was able to do the broad jump and tested into being extremely explosive. And when you're talking about that size that he has, for the most part, he's pretty much going to be there with a good arm length. All of the stuff that kind of goes into that, though, is going to depend on the fact that his shoulder may not necessarily be made to be lasting longer in the NFL. That's one of the things that we saw with the previous Alabama linebacker in Reuben Foster, who is one of the better linebacker prospects we've seen, who had far better film than what we've seen from Campbell. And he wasn't able to really make it in the NFL because of just some of the medical health that he had. And that's a little bit of a spot that we'll have to see what will go on draft night. But that's one of the spots, at least, that you're going to talk about a need for the Cardinals defensive tackle and Kenneth Grant. I think that with Grant, the biggest thing for me that maybe doesn't make him a slam dunk pick, and this is probably why he's not a top 10 pick, is the fact that he isn't quite as physical or as violent. Like, he looks like a lot more of a finesse player on tape, but he's 6'4", 330 pounds. So when you're that big and you can manhandle a guy, I think you could say, hey, we'll trust you. Got a new defensive line coach. You've got a new I would say at least kind of system that you're heading into. You might be able to have Jonathan Gannon get the most out from him, because that's something that I think is potentially a very, very clean player that you'd be able to take. It's not a sexy pick, being able to take a guy who's like a nose tackle. But when you talk about being able to get pass rush pressure, being able to have one of those guys who's not going to be available in Mason Graham, getting something else would be unique. The other guy, at least, that I think that will be interesting, at least to me, on this list here, and I'll share this one here, is going to be Amos, the cornerback. And that one's the one that is, if you want to talk about like a sleeper or a shocker pick, that may be Trey Amos. Trey Amos is one of those guys that just is able to get his hands on the ball. He's a solid playmaking guy as far as being able to actually like play in both zone and man coverage. And it's really fun, at least, to be able to see at least the one guy that they have not met, who seems to stock rising, in Maxwell Harrison, is the guy who is really going to be in a unique spot because I don't know if he completely fits with some of the size of some of the abilities. One of the things that's been fun, at least, to look around with Trey Amos is some of those cornerback smarts. So we're talking at least here about he's playing in one-on-one coverage. He's got the guy, he's basically able to kind of let the guy have his lineman, and then he picks up the second coverage, which is on a route that's designed to essentially, opening it up underneath. So you're talking about this is a very clear kind of over route where all you're doing in this spot is crisscrossing, doing like a little scissors concept. You're going man coverage as you show man, you run a concept like that. The guy looks like he's going to be open because you see at the bottom of the screen, they bootleg the man to the right. What does Trey Amos do? He just keeps his ability, at least in man, hands the guy off properly into the zone coverage, as you can see, and then just immediately, instinctually knows to look back for the ball on that play and is able to get the interception and save a touchdown. One of those picks that I wouldn't be mad about at Arizona. The question is it one of those guys that you take at 16? The answer is probably not. It's probably one of those, can you trade back and then take a corner? Do you even take a corner at all? I think this defensive tackle class is deep enough that if you said we like a cornerback enough to take him, that would be one of those potential picks for Arizona, I think, that could match up. And as we've seen, they've taken all of these guys that are in the top 30 drafts. They've taken at least one or two of these guys every single year. So if they don't take one, it would be an interesting pass for the Cardinals that we haven't seen quite yet.
Yeah, I would keep hitting that position until like we can get ourselves right and set. And I know we still have Max Melton on the roster. We have Kitro. I'm not sure how much confidence they have in Kitro, so I'm not sure how much play time. I forgot what his name. So the cornerback that we drafted last year in the 5th round, I believe. What's his name? Elijah.
Oh, Elijah Jones was a third round
Jones.
pick. They had like 3 third-round picks, I think, that year from the trade.
Yeah, see, I really liked him because I like the size and whatnot, and his film looked pretty well, looked pretty good and stuff. So it was seen like as a value pick in the 3rd round and whatnot. We don't know what we have in him because he didn't play last year, so we have no film. We have nothing to go off of. So if he goes and competes for the outside cornerback position, I think that he has more of the body type for that. But it's going to be him and Max Melton competing for that. So when we have our 2 guys that are competing to the outside, we really need to hope that at least one of those guys hits because, I mean, going into like the future and whatnot, like you do need to have a stud in the outside, like a person who's a shutdown cornerback to be able to hold down like a really good defense to give our, defensive line time to be able to get to the quarterback.
Yeah, no, it's something I think is very interesting. It's that balance, at least, of coverage versus pass rush. As we've seen in the NFL, pass rush wins, but good coverage, being able to actually manufacture a pass rush in front is something that also is helpful. Let's go ahead and have a couple of comments, at least for the most part, from some people we'll get to. So we've got Silver Wolf talking about trading down and taking Walter Nolan. We'll get to a little bit more on Nolan, at least, here in a bit. We have Dana talking about Campbell's film, not seeing the 1st round, but 2nd or 3rd has the athleticism, but not a pass rush technique. That's something I agree with. He's physically violent. He's got a great bull rush. But as far as for being able to have bend and some of the other pieces, it's one of those cases of where, like, you get an athlete, and I think a little different from an Isaiah Simmons. I think we've talked a lot about how the usage and all of that were. It does feel like there's things that are in the NFL that Campbell will be able to do or have. However, one of the things that's interesting from a tidbit we can say from Mel Kiper's draft podcast, he's heard it multiple times, the 2nd round is a possibility for Campbell. Now, why would that be? And the answer would be, well, if he's got the measurables, unless there's something very off with people feeling that his instincts aren't there, the medical bill of health may not be as good on his shoulder. That would be one of the things that you can probably see about, at least to find out. You can at least talk a little bit more with some comments. We got Deontay Lawson was the Mike and the better off-ball guy. That's another interesting question that we'll see. And yeah, it'll be very interesting because, like we said, Cardinals being able to get a guy who would be another linebacker who could rush the passer somewhat and make plays is something that'd be really interesting because we've seen them try this before. The question is, do you trust the coaching staff to be able to get that done? All right, let's shift into talking now, at least. We'll get to our mock draft here in a second, but we did have Dane Brugler, who is one of the top NFL draft scouting guys in the community. Closest thing you'll find to getting a behind-the-scenes look as an NFL scout. Dropped his top 100 and his what's called the Beast, as they've called it, were scouting 2,600 different prospects. I always tell people, at least for the most part, recommend it through the Athletic subscription each year. This year it's big enough I had to get 2 different volumes, so just kind of a free pitch or a plug. But if you really want to get into NFL scouting and understand some of the behind the scenes, great way to be able to do it. Dropping some of these top 5 rankings, every draft scout's going to have a little bit different for their top 5. What we get to see is pretty chalk this year between Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders. As far as the running backs, we see Jalen Milroe makes the bottom half of the top 5. When we're talking about the running backs, interesting note, Cam Scadaboo not here. We'll talk about that a little bit. Kyler Murray did say that he said, hey, some guys are not going to necessarily run as fast as possible, but they'll make plays on tape. He seemed like he was not at least against, or maybe just saying nice things because you're in an interview, you want to say nice things. But yeah, Cam Scadaboo not in the top 5 running backs. The size and speed combo, I think, of the other 5. And we can even say that he was quite a bit later from some of the other quicker players as well. He went all the way down at least to the running back, I think 11 or 12. So there, your receivers, you've seen a lot of controversy and some questions. I've seen some Cardinals fans who've said they wanted to pair Marvin Harrison Jr. with Emeka Egbuka. I've seen some who've wanted a Matthew Golden speed threat. I've seen some who said, hey, Ted McMillan, if he's there at 16, he's like a top 5 talent in this class. You got to take him. You'll be set for a long time. You get that U of A classic type of player. I think the Cardinals would more likely be looking at guys like a Jalen Noel or a Jaden Higgins later, maybe even a Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. We can skip over tight ends. There are going to be hopefully 1 or 2 tight ends that you'd love to see go ahead of the Cardinals pick in the first round. That would cause another player to drop to them since they already have the highest paid tight end in NFL history. And then something unique, at least here at the top 5 rankings, that we can't go over these top 5 rankings without talking about who is not here in the top 5. You've got Will Campbell is going to be off the board before the Cardinals pick. Armand Membo, after a strong combine, is probably going to go back up there. You have Josh Simmons and Josh Connerly rounding out the top 4. The question, Marcos, is where is going to be Kelvin Banks Jr.? Where did he in the top list of offensive tackles?
Well, I guess he projects more as a guard. So you have a 6'7" guy. Like that's what I found so weird. He's I always see
a large guy.
Shorter.
Yeah, Kelvin Banks Jr. ranked at 6'5", 315 pounds.
Oh, no,
that's
6'5",
something.
my bad.
But it is a spot of like one of the things that I've seen is a lot of guys have given him to the Cardinals because they said, well, I'm not comfortable with Josh Jones, but looking at Jonah Williams, like he's on a 1-year deal. Kelvin Beachum also on a 1-year deal. Cardinals, maybe you could bring in someone to start at right guard for a season while Will Hernandez is coming back from his injury issues. It's just really interesting, at least for the most part, that we'll have to be able to see what goes on with where the Cardinals will rank some of these players. We have not seen Monty Ossenfort with the Cardinals take an interior offensive lineman before day 3 in the draft. So something where I don't think that we could see a Tyler Booker like there. He's a guy that with how the Cardinals run counter, we've talked with how his low athleticism and 40 time ranked, it'd be a little bit of a stretch. You may have to change your offense to fit him. Banks Jr. is going to have some of that athleticism, but Tate Ratledge is probably the most athletic of those guards. He's going to satisfy some of the same criteria that we saw them use on being able to add someone like a John Gaines II, being able to find an athletic kind of guard / center. Wrapping up at least for some of just the offensive positions and defensive ones here. Centers, they like Gray Zabel. Seth McLaughlin's an interesting name for the Cardinals because you talk about Ohio State and offensive line. He's going to be someone that maybe on day 3, if you say, hey, we have loved what Froholt has done, we're going to be able to get younger and cheaper, let him maybe walk to either a different team or kind of hedge your bet knowing that the NFL is going to be a constantly changing league. Sometimes you have a guy who plays well 1 year and they're just going to be retired the next year. With edge rushers, this is the spot where we can talk. Your guy, James Pierce, did not show up here in this top 5 edge rushers list, Marcos.
Yeah, that's interesting. I I don't know. I gotta read on that because when it comes to scouting, there's like obviously so much nuance that goes into it. But that's just really interesting. He's ranked at 7. That's crazy. That's like second round, like basically going to the second round. That would be a good value at second round.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I know that a lot of the questions that we've had as far as with character and other places, like this is part of where, the Cardinals have seen both. You've seen high character, low character have kind of come through at the franchise. One of the things, at least when talking about the weaknesses that James Pierce Jr. had as far as that and the off field, he did have traffic charges, which was a speeding at a stop. Charges were later dismissed. Question from an NFL scout had quoted and said, "I want to be convinced that he loves this." And that, I think, is one of the biggest things. You can get a talented guy who runs a 4.4 40-yard dash. We've seen guys who absolutely have to love ball. We've seen guys like a Josh Rosen who at the end of the day just did not have the desire, passion, and even the mental push, because when you're a guy with average athletic traits like Rosen and a guy who's not going to maybe have that same passion or commitment of a guy who just is nothing but ball in Kyler Murray, that's going to be something that we'll have to see. But that's something that's interesting since he's a player the Cardinals brought in. Want to keep an eye on him. These guys as well. We're going to see Jalen Walker. I'm thinking will be off the board by pick 8. If he falls to 16 or even falls to pick 15, I think the Falcons would take him. So I think you're talking then about if you want an edge rusher for the Cardinals, it's going to be one of these 4 guys: Jalen Walker, Shamar Stewart, Mike Green, who's going through a sexual assault charge, Shamar Stewart being the 1.5 sacks a year guy, and then Michael Williams, who people hoped would take that step to being a Will Anderson type of edge rusher this year. He did not for Georgia, said he played through an injury all season long. Now let's move on to the next controversial spot, which is going to be looking at our defensive tackles. And most people have got the Michigan guys going top 2, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. And Derek Harmon sneaking his way into DT number 2. He's probably, as far as the one player that I think has a realistic chance to be there for Arizona if Grant goes early. You also have Walter Nolan, who is really interesting because Nolan's a guy that spent 6 different seasons with 7 different teams. Question at least then is, why did he go to so many places? Was he chasing NIL money? Is it more of a mercenary type of role? He flashes some big time disruption, but there's some weakness that we've seen in the run game with him. This is one of those places, at least, where as far as it goes with edge rushing and defensive tackle, I've kind of cooled on the fact that the Cardinals, I know some people have said that Walter Nolan is probably the guy. He would be able to be one of the fits. I know Silver Wolf is definitely a fan of trading down and taking him. But what we're going to see, I think, for the most part, Marcos, is there's enough guys that have some question marks that are here that we'll get a good knowledge of how Monty Austinford is going to attack the NFL draft, probably based off of how they view their meetings with Kenneth Grant and Walter Nolan, because the depth is very good in this class. If you don't get Derek Harmon and you're like, we're not sold on Grant with that, having that edge, maybe he goes before your pick. We're not sold at least on Nolan as far as him being able to develop into being that star player. You can grab a defensive tackle like a Tyleik Williams, maybe gone late first or early second. You got Shamar Turner, a Darius Alexander for the most part, who is a bit older, kind of like a Darius Robinson type, Alfred Collins being a experienced, I think at least a guy who I think experience is inexperienced, excuse me. He only really played for like the last season, essentially, but at 332, 6'6", he's just a solid playmaker in the middle of the field. Like that's like your playmaking nose tackle that you're going to want, getting that Dan Williams type, but on a budget. Some guys the Cardinals met with in TJ Sanders and then Josh Farmer. This is a fantastic defensive line draft for the Arizona Cardinals. It's got a couple of good edge rushers, and then there's a little bit of a drop off. We've talked a little bit about Jihad Campbell at the linebacker spot. Carson Schlesinger is the guy that I think I would love for Arizona to get if they're going to spend a pick because of the medicals. I just don't think that he's going to be there for that second round pick, and I don't think they would take him at 16. We've talked about maybe you look at a round 5 or round 6 even, I think, type of player. I think it's actually round 7 for the Cardinals picks that they have. And then, of course, we talk cornerbacks. He's Dane Brugler has Travis Hunter as a corner. I think that he could actually be the first wide receiver taken, depending on if he goes to the Cleveland Browns at 2. You can see they've got Jahdae Barron, who doesn't have top size. Some have questioned, can he be an outside corner or would he be slot only? Maxwell Hairston, not necessarily the tackler guy that you want. Trey Amos is the one guy I think that if the Cardinals say, we're not going to be able to have with Will Johnson, he's going to go too early for us. Travis Hunter goes too early for us. Maybe if Will Johnson is there at 16, that could be the talent that falls to you for that pick. Trey Amos would be a very interesting trade back guy for the Cardinals, or a guy that you could just see if he falls into round 2. And the last spot, of course, safeties in the top 5. I have Malachi Starks as my top safety this year, and Nick Emmanwori, who's super athletic with a lot of speed, as the second corner. This is summing up a lot, Marcos. What we're going to do now is actually put these prospects onto a board. So let's do a 1-round mock draft. We're going to alternate picks, and I'm going to leave it up to you if you want odds or evens as we kind of wrap up our pod today with a round 1 mock draft.
I'll do odds.
Mm-hmm. Means you're up first to go to the top of the draft. Let's do this based off of both a combination of team needs and what we think the teams are at this point in the NFL draft going to do. You're up with the Titans.
Okay, so I think they're going to go Cam because they need a quarterback, and obviously Cam is the best quarterback prospect in this draft. So yeah, they're going to go Cam Ward.
Yeah, he's gotten some Kyler Murray comparisons with how he has been able to make plays with his legs. I think that Kyler has an arm stronger. He's a lot faster, and there's a lot more control with Kyler. Like, Cam has gotten into trouble sometimes. You think of early 2019 Kyler, where he wasn't quite able to make some of those top plays without getting tackled. He had to kind of adjust his game a bit. I think that Cam Ward is one of those guys who, I don't know if he'll be a star, but if he can kind of be a consistent quarterback and be able to have upside, it's going to do more for the Titans than anyone. This is going to be the, I would say, Cleveland Browns. And what I would love to do here is say that Shedeur Sanders is worth taking at number 2 overall, because their biggest need for an upgrade is at quarterback. They really just had a below-average offense. Even if you wanted to say pairing Abdul Carter with the likes of Myles Garrett, having the present and the future would be a good idea. They just don't really have weapons. I think that in this spot, if you wanted to say that Travis Hunter, with time, is one of those guys that with him and Jerry, I think it's Jerry Jeudy, unless I'm mistaken, being with the Browns, that would be a 1-2 combo that seems to be top tier for the most part. The question, of course, is, do you think, Marcos, that this is a spot where the Browns should take between these two? Or is this the spot where we just don't need to overthink it? The top 2 teams need quarterbacks. The Giants also need a quarterback. Should we take one of those quarterbacks here at this spot?
Yeah, that's they probably should just go quarterback so they can try to build for the future, because that Deshaun Watson situation is just so ugly. They need to distance themselves as far as they can. They just signed Myles Garrett to a phenomenal, crazy big contract. So the type of money going forward, it's just not going to be up. It's just not going to be there for them to be able to sign a big name quarterback or trade for one. So yeah, I would probably just go quarterback and see what you can do with Shedeur.
Yeah, they did just sign Joe Flacco, and they really have just been, I think one of the things I'll say is I'm going to gamble if I'm the Browns a little bit and see if I can trade up for Sanders a little bit later, depending on how it goes. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to disappoint Patriots and other fans that are there looking for Travis Hunter, take him second overall. Now you got the Giants on the clock. To me, this is a spot where you could argue an offensive lineman. You could argue probably taking the best pass rusher in the draft. They have 2 guys who are actually really good, plus having, I believe, now Leonard Williams was traded to the Seahawks, but they have one of the top defensive tackles in the NFL with, I want to say, Lawrence. Yes, Dexter Lawrence. If you told me that this is a team that said, hey, we want to be able to take a quarterback here, that may be their best move, honestly. Like, they would love to probably see if they get Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, but I think back to that Daniel Jones draft and say, do you really think that a team like the Saints is going to pass on Sanders? Do you think that you're going to be able to trade up high enough back into the first round for Sanders? Or you just say, we're going to take the best pass rusher in the draft in Abdul Carter and be able to just make an aggressive move to get our quarterback, knowing we've got a fallback option or 2. What is your take, Marcos?
Well, if they do go with defensive end or edge rusher, they're really going to make that defensive line a strength. So that's
Mm.
going to be the decision. Hey, do we just make this a strength going forth and make it so that they can win us some games or keep us in some games, and then wait until we get to the second round to draft a developmental quarterback? I think that's a decision that I would do if I was the Giants, because then at that point you have all these studs on the defensive line that could definitely like get to the quarterback and make people feel uncomfortable and whatnot. So I would definitely take Abdul Carter here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. We'll go with Carter, leaving the Patriots. And gosh, they need playmakers at wide receiver. Tet McMillan is still there on the board. They also could use help at tackle. They need help on the offense in general. I think that Abdul Carter would have been something we would have loved to have seen here. If I'm the Patriots, I'm going to probably see if I can try to get one of the other receiving threats for the most part, and then just be able to know that I need to get a solid tackle. Will Campbell is someone who's on the board here. Some people looked at him as a guard. You also have Armand Membo, who is at least a little bit more athletic. This is the spot where I think what I will talk about here is you got to probably just say, you know what, Will Campbell was the OT1 coming out. He was kind of the Paris Johnson of this draft. I would rather be able to keep my quarterback upright and then be able to say, I'm going to invest a receiver later, knowing I got to take the long approach with this Patriots roster. So I'm going to take Will Campbell here at 4th overall, leaving you with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Marcos.
That's going to be pretty interesting because they just got themselves the best not the best wide receiver, but the one that put up the better stats last year. And so you would think they wouldn't need to draft another wide receiver. I don't know. The quarterback's fine. They don't really need much cornerback help on defense. They locked up their top corners. So
Yep. You got
I
one
think
guy that's standing out there, yeah.
Mason Graham is gonna have to be the one that goes there, the best defensive tackle.
Yeah, I'd
On the
love to see
Jaguars.
that
Yeah, I
happen.
would do that.
I'm curious if there's, let's say that a team like the Bears decides to get super aggressive, who's looking for running back, and they could trade up ahead of the Raiders for an Ashton Gianti. That would be a really interesting one here. As far as for what the cost that we would see with the Bears, it would probably cost, if we're going to do a trade in here, they've got 2 second-round picks. So if you want to give up 10 and 41 to get back 5 and let's say 70, that would be an interesting set of trades. I would agree with you that if I'm the Jacksonville Jaguars, though, and I got Mason Graham on the board, I know he's probably going to go at least somewhere in this pick 7, pick 9, pick 11 range. I'm going to go with Mason Graham and be able to get that impact guy with Josh Allen on one side, and then your number 1 pick on his 5th-year option as well, who was taken one ahead of Aiden Hutchinson. This time they're not passing on the Michigan man. Now you've got Geno Smith, Chip Kelly, and this is one of those picks where I would normally say a running back would not be valued as much, but you're talking about Pete Carroll running the football in a Chip Kelly offense with Vegas. They need help on offense. They need probably another receiver after letting go of Devontae Adams. They have Brock Bowers. I'm going to take Ashton Gianti here. This is one of the best running back prospects we've seen in a while. One of the guys who's worthy of taking in the top 10. You said that Tet McMillan was someone who made sense. I could also see it as well. I'm going to lean a little bit and say that there's been a lot more people polarized on McMillan. Some people think that he could be similar to like a Mike Evans. I think the closest for him, honestly, is like, think of a Michael Floyd without some of the off-field stuff, a guy who can get 1,000 yards each season, be reliable. I'm going to take Gianti here, knowing that I could have a special run game and play action offense with him and Brock Bowers. And that brings us to the New York Jets, Marcos.
Yeah, this one's going to be pretty interesting. So I'm not sure if they're really set on quarterback, but they're going to have to give him some weapons. So it's either going to be a situation where you get Tet McMillan here, but also you might want to go tight end maybe because they do have weapons. They do have weapons when it comes to their receivers, or at least they got a one weapon out there.
Garrett Wilson out there, and they did
Garrett
bring
Wilson.
in a couple of other guys. But yeah, you leaning toward tight end, or is another position that you're thinking here?
Yeah, I'm thinking about tight end.
All right,
because that way they can give him like a safety blanket type of receiving threat.
Yep. We have not had a quarterback taken after Cam Ward. Do you think that this is a spot for Shadur Sanders? You've got Justin Fields is on there with a 2-year deal. They also at least have Tyrod Taylor who could start or play. Shadur would actually give them a future. I just wonder if they're going to be in the first year probably just not wanting to just restart everything with that. I could see it being a Tyler Warren draft pick. He's going to be able to have that two-way ability with blocking and being like a top receiver to be able to get some heat off of Garrett Wilson. And he'll be effective in running the ball too. So yeah, let's give him with the Jets. All right, the wide receiver can be a need for the Panthers. McMillan seems to make a lot of sense here, but they also traded away Brian Burns. They really could use an edge rusher, and the one that I think that sticks out the most, if I'm going to look at all of this, is going to be actually a linebacker in Jalen Walker. So we're talking about, let's say that the Cardinals took Hassan Reddick, beefed him up with like a mega mushroom, and stuck him on the edge to start his career. That's kind of what Jalen Walker has been. He's been versatile. You've seen him play off ball. We've seen him on the edge. He's got the bendiness and those instincts. And with how the Panthers have been building their team, I think they're going to take a defensive player, or a Tet McMillan here makes sense. But let's give them Jalen Walker, who's ranked a little bit lower than some of the other edge rushers, but ultimately has the athleticism and the production. I think that he'll go higher than some of those guys on draft night. And that leads us to the Saints. And Derek Carr may miss them of the season. He may get surgery. You've got needs, honestly, at least two. A Tet McMillan could fit here with some of the concussion issues we've seen. You could also talk me into any of the probably any of the other guys that are here on the board, as far as they've got some good defensive linemen, but Kenneth Grant is still out there. You've got the likes of Derek Harmon is still out there. It's very interested to see how you're going to go here with pick number 9, Marcos, as Shadur Sanders. That could be your quarterback pick. Could also just go out and get one of these other guys. What are you thinking?
I'm going with Shadur here because they do need to.
Woo!
I don't know if they have all the confidence in the world for someone like for Derek Carr and whatnot. So they do need a quarterback, and they do need to start moving on to that direction. So I would go with quarterback. Shadur Sanders.
I think that's a good way to be able to go. Now you've got the Bears who've got defensive line needs. They've got an edge rusher. Maybe you could see another edge rusher that pops up. I think that this is the place where Armand Membo would be one of the guys who I could see him going to the Jets previously as well. What I like about this spot in this draft here is that you've got Kenneth Grant, who's still available within the top 10. The top running back that you'd see is gone. I think that this is one of those places where you could argue for another edge rusher that goes across from the likes of, I think it's, is it Devontae, or it's across from Sweat is the other one that's going to be there. This is one place that I could see Shamar Stewart go. Mikael Williams could go. Mike Green, depending on how the off-field looks. Those are all different places. Some people have even mentioned that running back with Amari and Hampton could be possible here. I think that it's a deep enough running back class, and that you're talking about with how things play out, this would be a spot that I could see Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon potentially going. Most people in this spot at least have been taking Kenneth Grant because of the size and a bit of the upside. You're also got the Vikings, the Packers run game, and the Lions in that division. I'm going to add Kenneth Grant here to the interior of that defensive line, and know that I'll be able to probably get my running back in a future round 2 or round 3. 11 for the Niners. Offensive line needs, defensive line needs, and a cornerback now that they've got their old defensive coordinator back over from the Jets and Robert Saleh. What you thinking here for the Niners, that division rival, Marcos?
I would just go with kicker here because of the 49ers, and I just want to make them miserable and whatnot.
We'll grab every long snapper in every round. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think they're going to go with probably cornerback help. Not sure if they're gonna want to need like wide receiver that desperate, but maybe Jahdae Brown is gonna be the one that I would say if he's CB1, then he'd probably go there. So I'd say
I could see him or Will Johnson going between each of those two. I could see that. I could see Armand Membo going. If we're going to with corner, let's say that Jahdae Barron at least is the one that we're going to select, leading us to the Dallas Cowboys. This is the one that I think is interesting. Dana is pointing out that there's a meeting at the Patriots, the Saints, the Cowboys, and Panthers all use top 30 visits on McMillan. They all have wide receiver needs. I think this is where Jerry runs up to the podium and just grabs the top receiver in the draft to pair across from CeeDee Lamb, knowing that CeeDee is going to be that slot inside receiver. He's also, I think that Lamb is actually in kind of some of the prime of his career right now, so he's not going to be hitting 30 for couple more years. Yeah, he's only 26 years old. You get Dak Prescott, 2 weapons to go with all of that. I think that this could be one of those Cowboy push years. You could also talk about that Amarian Hampton's there. Maybe it's too early for an interior offensive line. Maybe Tyler Booker's someone who they could see fitting. I'm going to grab Tet here. He's going to be the number 2 receiver for the Cowboys, but he's going to be part of an explosive offense. That brings us to maybe one of the wilder teams, the Miami Dolphins. Tyreek Hill's had a domestic incident. Wide receiver has been kind of the trending thing. They lose Calais Campbell, so they got needs on the defensive line. You could sell me on Will Johnson going here as well as Armand Membo. Who are you going to take, Marcos?
I think what I would do is I'd probably go with I'm not sure. I think I'd just go with Membo because of the offensive line isn't solid. It's kind of still kind of shaky and whatnot, and we all know that you have to protect I can't
You
believe
got to
I forgot
protect
what
Tua
his
Tagovailoa, and
Tagovailoa. Yep.
to add to that, Teron Armstead, their left tackle, just announced his retirement. So they've got no left tackle right now. I think that Membo could go in the top 10. Instead, he goes here at 13 to the Dolphins. That brings us to the Colts, who let's call this like it is. Colts need a tight end. Colston Loveland is there. We all know that they just need a starter, anyone who will be there at tight end. To me, this feels like a match made in heaven as far as for needs. They could also be a team that could use a guard. They could use an edge rusher as well. We're still seeing the likes of Micah Green on the board. We're still seeing Jahad Campbell on the board as well. Who would you take here for the Colts, Marcos? Because I think I know who I'm going to take for the Colts, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I will go tight end as well because that's definitely what their biggest need is, and you want to get another safety blanket for our AR-15 to be able to start hitting over the middle.
Helps their blocking game and helps a lot with that offense. With Jonathan Gannon's former, coordinator Shane Steichen, they grabbed that tight end. We got quite a bit of talent on the board right now, Marcos. We've got the Atlanta Falcons who are up, and I think this is going to be a sweet spot for an edge rusher. So from what we've seen here, we've got Michael Williams is up there on the board. Shamar Stewart is a possibility. Donovan Ezekuraku is there. Mike Green is a guy that's had questions and off-field issues, but he's probably, if we're going to rate things properly, probably the best and most talented of those guys here. Some people have said that the Falcons could also be looking at an interior offensive linebacker. I think in this spot, it's pretty easy at least to be able to see what the needs are and how it matches up. But what are your thoughts, Marcos?
Sorry, my microphone was muted this entire time. So it says that wide receiver is the need, but I'm not sure who would be next up on wide receiver. And crazy thing is, so
no center's going that high, so you're kind of looking at
there's no center. I probably just a speedster from Texas.
Yeah, I think that's probably at least good. Getting Shamar Stewart.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we'll draft Shamar Stewart. Cardinals now be on the clock for the most part, and that's going to at least mean now we're in a spot where the next pick that's upcoming is going to be the Bengals. We've got Jahad Campbell on the board, Micah Green, who the question is, will he be a character guy that fits for them? Will Johnson, of course, is still on the board. I think that there's a possibility that we see Will Johnson go here, and it's Jahdae Barron who falls then. I think if that scenario happens, then I think at least you're probably not going to. You've got Josh Simmons, who's available with this spot. The one that's also there with Walter Nolan, and then you got Derek Harmon. There's enough talent that's here on the board, Marcos. I would love to see about trading back if I'm the Cardinals. And we've got the Seattle Seahawks, lo and behold. They're looking to trade up. So they're going to be offering the Cardinals pick 18, along with, I believe it's going to be pick 92. It's going to be there. The Cardinals are going to send back a round 5 pick in 2026 just to make it set. And we've moved back. The Seattle Seahawks are now on the board. And with this spot, you know what they really, really need is offensive line help. They're going to go ahead and grab a top guard over here. And just with how the interior has lined up, they're going to actually end up taking probably the top interior offensive lineman here in Gray Zabel. So the defensive line, huge need. Guard, huge need for the Bengals. Seahawks jump and are able to get Gray Zabel. I think that he's a better guard prospect than Kelvin Banks Jr. And that leads us to your pick now, Marcos, with the Cincinnati Bengals, who just got sniped.
Yeah, they definitely just got sniped. They probably will go with Jahad Campbell. Trey Hendrickson, not sure what's going on with him and whatnot, but I think that on this type of defense that they're going to try to change over where they went to better coverage defense, and now needing to bolster up that defensive line to be able to help, because Trey Hendrickson was the only type of person getting pressure last year on that
Yeah.
defensive line. So they're going to take him, and then they're going to try to make him into like the Sam that I keep saying that he's going to be.
Could be a
dropping coverage,
combination
but
edge
also
rusher dropping into coverage. I think that's a great fit overall. I think that they also could use a defensive tackle. You've got Walter Nolan and Derek Harmon are both here as well. The interior offensive line, you got sniped. I think that in this spot, they'll probably go ahead and take Jihad Campbell, like you said, if the medicals check out. That seems like you could, like you said, you could kill two birds with one stone with linebacker and defensive line. That leads us to the Arizona Cardinals, who still have Will Johnson on the board, who have Josh Simmons on the board, who have the likes of Derek Harmon still on the board. This is a spot where I don't know if you can necessarily trade back again, because who's trading up? I think it would be some team would have to possibly trade up for an edge rusher, the edge rusher being Mike Green. I don't know if we'll be able to trade back a second time, but let's take a look and see if a team is willing to make a move up. I think that one of the teams that we could potentially see in the Los Angeles Chargers, they've got a need at receiver. There's maybe a guy they could jump up ahead of to get a Luther Burden. There's also a need for an edge rusher that's pretty severe. The team that I think would be taking an edge rusher here ahead of the Ravens would probably not be willing to give up that much, considering that we've got plenty of guys still on the board in this scenario. You got Green, Ezeraku, Mykel Williams. I think that the Cardinals are going to be sticking here. The question is, Marcos, who would you take in this scenario? Because I've got who I would take. I'm curious who you would take if this was the spot for the Cardinals. Is this just a Will Johnson chalk, a best edge rusher chalk, or would you mix it up a bit?
Honestly, I probably would try to trade back again, because I really like Mykel Williams. It doesn't seem like he's going to be going just yet. So other than that, I would definitely get Will Johnson at this scenario, because I knew when you traded back and he was still available, that's my guy. So personally, if it's not trading back, I would just get Will Johnson at this pick.
Yeah, I know. My pick is a little bit out of left field. I would take Josh Simmons with this pick if the medicals check out. They've got the Cardinals offensive tackle coach. I think that he's the guy that probably goes as another top 10 offensive tackle. He's a pure tackle also versus and he's one of those players where you talk about getting a solid 10-year type of a guy. That's where the question, of course, with the health is going to be interesting. I think that they're going to lean on their coach. I would probably go and take him here. Will Johnson makes a lot of sense, also getting a top corner who falls to them. What we haven't really done is get them an edge rusher like Mike Green or one of my favorite players in this draft in Derek Harmon. There's a lot of different places that we'd be able to go. I think that the easy one, if I had to say that's going to solve and fix some of the areas for the Cardinals, is probably Mykel Williams. You probably take a spot on him being the youngest guy, of being able to say that injury is a little bit of a discount from what he gets his last season. I think that Derek Harmon is the Calais replacement for being disruptive. That would be a long-term type of a guy you can have, but I like the defensive tackle depth in this class. After this, you're not going to get any of these top edge rushers who are going to have that athleticism that Williams has. I'll take him just ahead of an edge rushing needy team in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Marcos, you got one edge rusher off the board. You got a couple still left.
Yeah, that's true. And then of course they would definitely to our old defensive coordinator, and I can't believe I always forget these damn names and stuff. It always happens whenever I'm
Todd
like
Bowles. Todd Bowles,
Todd
head
Bowles,
coach,
there you go.
still kicking. They just have defensive needs for the Bucs.
Even though he's really good at being able to like his corner, like the way he develops cornerbacks and safety is just crazy. But I think I would definitely have to take edge rusher. So let's say he takes Mike Green and then somehow is able to say, okay, we're gonna bring him over, and then he's actually gonna his off-field stuff is not gonna be an issue, and we're just gonna take the talent. So I would say Mike Green in this pick.
Yeah, I think Mike Green's a better natural edge rusher. I would say that if it wasn't for some of the off-field questions and how we think the Cardinals have looked at some of those players, he would probably be one of the better pass rushers in this draft overall, would probably be getting a lot more top 5, top 10 love along with Abdul Carter. Broncos, this is one that is back, and this is going to be probably a little bit of a surprise pick for some, but if you've been following and look at Sean Payton, he loves running backs. He wants to run the ball effectively. He wants to be able to give his quarterback time. They've got a huge need for that on offense. Marion Hampton is the guy that I would be taking here if I'm the Broncos. I think it's both been hinted at and something that is a need for them. And this is going to be one of those places where the NFL is changing again. You go from tons of receivers in the first round to teams are now back to running the ball, and getting a strong running backs and strong run games to run against these lighter pass rushers is back in style. You got the Steelers, and we've already got Shadur off the board. They've got a quarterback need for the most part. They also could use a running back. They just got sniped. Offensive tackle makes some sense for them there. And there's one player that sticks out particularly that makes a unique spot here that's standing at the top of the board. I'm curious, what would you go in this scenario? First. Yeah, he's there and Will Johnson's there. I think either of those guys, you can't go wrong if you're the Steelers.
Maybe just draft I think I would go with Will Johnson here so that way they can have their cornerback tandem and for the future, two young guns and Joey Porter Jr. and Will Johnson.
I think that's great, at least for that. I think that with the safety here, that either of those is probably good. And we've seen safeties can sometimes fall in the draft. Speaking of falling, Tet McMillan did not fall to the Chargers, but Luther Burden III did. I think that he's the one other guy between him and Emeka Egbuka who could be both Chargers. What's interesting, of course, is with how Luther Burden looks, at least for the most part, he is super well-rounded, agile, explosive. He's going to be a little bit different from your Egbuka, who everyone says is a solid overall guy. I'm going to be kind of a swerve a little here. Instead of taking Burden, who I think is a first-round guy, I'm going to take Egbuka and have him be kind of like the new Keenan Allen for Justin Herbert. I think they just need reliable hands. He can play inside and outside, has the athleticism. I'll take Egbuka, and that leaves the Packers on the clock with a wide receiver need, and Luther Burden still there.
Yeah, I would just go safe here and go with Luther Burden, being that, they don't have that stability at wide receiver just yet. Even though I like Christian Watson, he gets injured quite a bit, so yeah, there you can't go wrong with another wide receiver to the Green Bay Packers.
Yep, let's move through here. We've got the Vikings are on the clock. The running back need with Aaron Jones and with having a trade now is no longer there. I think that defensive line Derek Harmon makes a ton of sense, as does Walter Nolan. Let's give them Derek Harmon. And now talk about the Houston Texans, who Laramie Tunsil is gone from the team. They also are in a spot where Stephon Diggs is not going to be with their team. He signs with the Patriots. They need wide receiver. They need O-line. Do you go with the Matthew Golden here, or do you go with the offensive lineman? Because there's one that's fallen, and it is in a pretty good spot. He just will not be healthy probably for the 2025 season, and that's going to be really interesting to find out at least. Do you take Josh Simmons here, knowing he may miss the first 8 games? Do you put Kelvin Banks Jr. as a tackle? Do you take a Josh Connerly, or do you take a look at it and say, we got some tackles. We can get some help if we need to. Let's go out there and get Matthew Golden at least, so we've got our 1-2 punch with being able to have Golden as that outside speedster. What is your spot that you're going to go with, Marcos?
Oh, you got to go with tackle here. So that's going to be the great question. Kelvin Banks, who's more like being seen as a guard, but Josh Simmons being the fact that he's going to miss like so many games.
It does leave Josh Connerly. It does leave Josh Connerly down here. If you do feel like that's one of the things of needing a start and play tackle, that is another option. I think that there's good arguments to be made for all 3 guys. Which pick will you want to make?
I'll go with Josh Simmons just to be safe.
All right. Go with Simmons at least here, who's probably, I think, one of the top talents in the draft. If he comes back from that injury, it will be fine. The good old division rival Los Angeles Rams. They also are in the new need for a tackle. They also could use a tight end. Obviously, of course. I think that in this scenario, you got to think at least that they're good on the guards. They could use another right tackle. They also could end up using at least a cornerback. And from what we've seen here, Trey Amos is one of those guys that could be available. Connerly seems to make some sense. We haven't seen enough tight ends that have gone in this range. Like Elijah Aroro, it's going to be way too early for him. I think that this is one of those places where you also have the value of Starks, but I'm just going to go ahead here and say that you're going to have to, at some point, be able to protect Matthew Stafford in a key year. I think I'll take the tackle in this spot if I am the Rams. He's a guy I'd be okay with taking, even if the Cardinals took him at 16. I like his talent enough that I'd be fine with all of that. Instead, he goes here to pick 26 to the division rival Rams. That leaves us now with a couple teams left. 27, guard, edge, and defensive back are all needs for the Baltimore Ravens.
I will definitely be going with Calvin Banks here. The guard is what they need. They got a tackle that could look like a very good guard. I go with Calvin Banks.
Kelvin Banks there. All right, let's grab him at least over the likes of Tyler Booker. With the Lions, they're the team that's going to end up with Matthew Golden. They've got a need at guard and receiver. What we're seeing now with Malachi Starks is I think that would have been a fantastic fit for him, would have been with the Ravens.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
that's one of those that we can see. I'm going to go ahead and give Matthew Golden to the Lions. Receivers are something team want. We've got 4 of them going here. Maybe one of those guys falls to the next round. The Washington Commanders, they've got another need for edge rushers. They've got need for corner. You've got a couple of guys here in Walter Nolan, Trey Amos, Nick Scourton, and James Pierce Jr., who all could end up qualifying there for those needs. What are you going to go with?
I'm going to go with the edge here, so I'll go with Walter Nolan. They do need to beef up that defensive line.
Yeah, let's go and grab that at least here. Was it Nolan or was it Pierce? Because Nolan I know is the interior guy. And then Pierce is the edge rusher. So I think that if we wanted to go and just get defensive linemen to replace the outgoing, I think it was a guy out of Alabama. We'll go ahead and give them at Walter Nolan. It's going to leave us here at pick 30. You got edge rusher need. You've got Ezekiel. You've got James Pierce Jr. You've got Trey Amos. I think that Amos is one of those guys who I'm going to be a little sneaky. I would take him because I think if you said, would I rather have Ezekiel, James Pierce Jr., or a potential shutdown corner, give me the corner at least if I'm the Bills, and then see if I can get one more good year out of Von Miller would be my approach. You know, I got the Kansas City Chiefs, who really need a guard overall. They really could use a tackle. What we're seeing, at least on the board, is not any of those guys who are left for them. Mm-hmm. This is one of the spots of where I think this could be a trade scenario. So the question, of course, then, Marcos, is who would be looking at trading up to this Chiefs pick? Well, the ones that I think are most interesting, and this is probably what I'll think of here, is I could see a team like the Patriots could want to potentially see about moving up for a Jaden Higgins. They don't think he's going to fall. I could see a team trading up at least, such as the Giants weren't able to get the quarterback that they wanted. Could you see another team potentially making a move here? Or do you think that the Chiefs are going to look at the interior offensive line, the exterior offensive line, and try to take someone like a Donovan Jackson who's played tackle and played guard before?
That's interesting. Maybe, I mean, I think Donovan Jackson would go, this would be too much. I mean, not too much, too soon for him. It'd be too early. So I would trade back and have, drop him. I mean, draft him and stuff if I traded back. But other than that, like, yeah, they do need guard help, and they do.
Booker's right there help if you're looking at him. So,
yeah, I'd probably go with Booker then.
Yeah, let's say he's going to be big, he's going to be heavy, but he'll still move guys, and I think that'll work fine in the Andy Reid scheme. We got your championship Philadelphia Eagles, who also are going to be in that spot. I think in this place, they're just going to look at the board and say, you got us a either strong safety in Malachi Starks, but we're going to go with the edge rusher. Just keep throwing guys at that edge rush, that pass rush, see if they can get a second. And now we've got our overall NFL draft. I think we would have loved to have traded back twice is what we would have taken away. Cardinals here have quite a few pieces of talents that are falling at least to them. I think that if you're going to say that they would have taken any of Will Johnson, Derek Harmon, Josh Simmons, even a Walter Nolan, all of these are guys that I could see the Cardinals having on the board they could be taking. We'll get into some of that stuff next week as well as we kind of get ready and then have some of our final first round mock drafts and some round 7 round mock drafts for the Arizona Cardinals as well. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. For Marcos Labrada at Pancake Soul, I'm Blake Murphy. Good night, guys. You guys have just been rebooted. We'll talk to you next week. It'll be 1 week before the draft and we're back to you. Take care, everyone.
Take care.